Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Maika Sivo! Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to yet another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. They just keep coming as we hit 2024 in full stride now. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. And joining me for a watershed podcast, it always is a big one when we get the first proper Team List Tuesday of the season, are my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, it is a special feeling. It's a difference in the air. It's a difference in the week when the real Team List Tuesday, the first one of the season, rolls around. How are you faring as we get our first dose of proper team lists, proper team sheets this year?
Well, mate, how many sleeps is it now? Like for us recording on a Tuesday night, that's what, 4 sleeps?
Yep. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Yeah, exactly.
Until Saturday. And then, of course, you and I are appearing in Parramatta Leagues Club post-match, doing the live version of our instant reaction podcast. So, and people listening to this, in all likelihood, we're now going to be in the bistro. So we're going to be setting up in there. So look for us there. We'll obviously put a bit of socials, a bit out on the socials just to confirm that. But I can actually confirm that we have Steve Ella and David Lydiard as our guests this week. Oh, mate, we couldn't be happier with that. They've been brilliant guests in the past. I mean, honestly, for having either of them as on their own would be fantastic, but to get both of them together for the podcast, for the fans that are there, not only to listen to them, give their takes on the game and tell a few anecdotes, that sort of thing, but to get the photos, get an autograph, to meet them, have a bit of a chat. It couldn't be better for the fans to get down there. So just remember that, Paraleagues, home of the Eels, the Cumberland Throw back there again in 2024. But look for us at this stage in the bistro in the early stage of the season. We'll, if there's any change to that, of course, we'll let you know. Clint, how you doing, mate?
We're back, gents. We are back. The off-season is over. Much to the ire of my wife, who now sees me transition from off-season Clint to in-season Clint. She prefers off-season Clint to in-season Clint. But we're back. We're back in business. It all starts with like fooey running off the back fence. I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
Yeah,
mate, that's a dangerous prospect. Clint off the back fence. Given that I sit next to you at the football, I'm a bit worried now what the season has in store.
Boys, we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I might get Big Kev excited.
From a raft of team list to all the fallout from round 0 with the 2 NRL games played there. So before we get into it, as always, a quick shout out to the sponsors of the show, Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan, and Parramatta, absolute powerhouses for TCT and the Tip Sheet. Thank you, fellas, for everything you do. Let's get right into it, boys.
News team, assemble!
Got a lot to talk about for the Blue and Gold boys, and it includes a junior reps wrap-up from the weekend alongside a couple of important news in regards to a documentary and sponsors. But first, we'll start with Team List Tuesday, as we are wont to do when it matters, with the Eels taking on the Dogs in all 3 grades for the senior men's football, which means NRL, New South Wales Cup, and Jersey Flegg. Big one, obviously, is 5:30pm out at CommBank Stadium, Eels v Dogs, home game for the Eels. Bulldogs, take a quick look at them, boys. I know we'll do a more comprehensive look at the preview, but they've gone with Blake Taff at fullback, Crichton will captain the team in the centres, Matt Burton and Drew Hutchison in the halves. I think Hutchison is an interesting pick there, but he was the clear choice, or the clear preferred choice throughout the preseason. They've got a couple of new faces in the forward pack, Pawasa Fa'amasili and Jamin Salmon, former Eel. And then on the interchange, Josh Curran, one of our other pickups there, he leads the way there. So it's a solid, industrious team, boys. Probably lacking for some strike in the spine, and I say that knocking on wood. Hopefully that none of them have a big game against us. But before we dive into the Eels, anything you want to talk about with the Bulldogs?
Look, I think it's a solid team, and we'll get more into it in the preview podcast later in the week. So we don't want to dive too much into what's going to happen in the game. But the thing is, you always need to give respect to the opposition in any game of football for a start. And when it's the Eels versus the Bulldogs, quite often it doesn't matter how the teams line up or where they are on the ladder. You know that the Dogs, they want an Eels scalp just as much as the Eels want a victory over the Dogs. So I'm not going to look at who they've named and take anything more than they'll be tough opposition.
Yeah, the Eels with the ascendancy in the head-to-head in recent games, last 3 in a row, and 7 of the last 8 dating back to the start of 2020, I believe it is. But that one game they lost was the big ambush in season 2022. So you've got to bear that in mind when you take on the Dogs. They always aim up. Clint, I'll take us through the Eels, and then you can give me your sort of big call-outs to how they're shaping up, because there is at least one. I'm not surprised, but there was the one question to be answered in the back line, and I got to say that maybe BA has been listening to Boston and has Morgan a feeling. But yeah, as always, at fullback, Clinton Gufferson, he captains the team and is the rock in the custodial role. Bailey Simonson, after winning the starting centre spot in the preseason, now moves out to the wing to replace the suspended Maika Sivo. Sivo out for 3 weeks, obviously, which mirrors what happened with Ryan Madison last year. Eels starting behind the 8 ball in regards to their full roster. But that means Morgan Harper comes into the left centre position. He'll partner Bailey on that flank. Will Penasini and Sean Russell looked like a fantastic duo in the preseason. They'll be working on the right edge. Dillbags Brown and Mitchell Moses are in the halves. Reagan Campbell-Gillard, Junior Barlow and Joey Lussick in the front row. No surprises there. Indeed, that extends to the back row. Sean Lane, Bryce Cartwright, Jermaine Hopgood. BA didn't try and hide that in the preseason. They were the elected first elect back row, and that's true coming into Team List Tuesday. On the interchange, a minor hamstring strain to Widderoo Greg has cleared up what we speculated as a potential head scratcher for BA, which means his interchange shapes up with Brendan Hands, Ryan Madison, Joe Ofungai, and Kelma Tuolangi. Offiki Ogden is the 18th man, Dejan Arce the secondary reserve at number 19. Luca Moretti, Makesi Makatoa, and the young gun Blaise Talangi round out the extended roster. Obviously, the centre and the bench were probably the two, or centre/wing and bench were the two talking points ahead of Team List Tuesday. Quint, how do you see this one having played out now?
Well, obviously, we made the call last week ourselves, John. We thought that Hayes Dunster would slide into the side there. Obviously, the decision around there is to give him a little bit more time in Cup as he continues his, although he played last year, you got to say it was very much a return to field year for young Hayes. But Bailey Simonson shifts to the wing, and Morgan Harper gets a club debut along with Kelma Tuolangi. I dare say, and I know that Sixties has speculated as much as well, and we've discussed it over the course of the off-season, that there is the potential of a Tom Opportunist with Morgan Harper. And, you got the experience of him coming in there, and Bailey Simonson has played plenty of rugby league on the wing as well. So, I look at it as, a decision that's made with the defensive line in mind, because if I remember correctly, Stephen Crichton. Oh, actually, that's a good question. Now he's at Canterbury. Which edge has he moved to? Regardless, Bailey's come in on the wing as the more experienced winger as well. I say that given Hayes Dunster being the other obvious choice or contender for that position. And I think it's a solid decision for round one. Or despite the fact that we probably would have preferred Hayes and not to move 2 positions, but Brad's obviously got his reasons, and I speculate that's very much to do with it being having the more experienced players out there.
Yeah, I was going to say Brad probably plumped for experience there. It's not like Harper's a veteran, but he does have about twice as many games in his bag as Hayes. I think it's about 25 versus 52 or something like that. So there is an edge and experience there. And I suppose the other side of it too was Hayes was pretty clearly winger free behind both Maika and Sean, whereas Harper was locked in a very close duel with Bailey as centre 2. So in terms of close, like relative form, maybe he deemed that Harper was the better hand to go with.
It's probably a reward for a good preseason, right?
Also true.
Yeah. And as you fellas may recall, I actually had Harper edging Bailey Simonson at centre.
You did.
And that wasn't in any way a detriment or suggesting that Bailey Simonson wasn't up to starting the season at centre. I just was impressed with Morgan Harper's pre-season, and I believe that, as you noted before, because we talked about it in previous podcasts and amongst ourselves, that there is that Tom Opachik quality in terms of being the total professional at centre, and that's what I've seen from Morgan Harper during the pre-season. There were moments as well when this could have been flagged, this selection, because there were times where Bailey Simonson trained on the wing, and I guess that was something that was perhaps in BA's mind, that if something happened to a winger, what was his option going to be? And the most obvious thing was that Bailey Simonson would be playing on the wing and Morgan Harper in the centres. And again, that's not in any way speaking ill of Hayes, because I think, as you said, Clint, last season was very much a get back on the field season for Hayes, and he still had disruptions with not just injury but also illness. And I think he is going to benefit from getting some consistent football at the start of the season, really developing his confidence. He's a bigger unit than he was in the past, so he looks like he will play a more physical game. I mean, who knows? Hayes down the track might end up playing in the back row, such as like the size of Hayes, as far as I'm concerned. Like we've got players that are over 100 kgs that are on the wing, which is, I mean, that's not unusual in the NRL these days. But Sean Russell himself, he's probably put on about 6 or 7 kilos in the pre-season. He's tipping the scales, touching 100 kgs now. If he's at 100 kgs, Hayes has to be sitting around 105, because he looks significantly bigger than Sean, even though Sean's maybe just a touch taller. But anyway, as I was saying, I think it was this to me was what I expected the team to be this week. And as you also mentioned, John, having Brendan Hands on the bench, we speculated that when BA suggested that he wasn't going to select 2 dummy halves, we didn't rule out Brendan Hands at that point, because we thought if Joey Lussick is selected as starter, Brendan Hands has utility value, and he wouldn't be selected just as a dummy half. He might provide a few minutes for Joey Lussick, perhaps either side of half time or in some capacity out of dummy half. But I think his role on the bench is he also provides cover. And mind you, I believe so too does Kelma Tuolangi, because Kelma is more than capable of playing either in the middle or edge in the forwards, and he could play centre as well. So I think there's a bit of coverage there in the bench for backs and forwards and the spine. So I guess all I'd be saying now in as a final overarching view of the first grade team is I think it's fairly well balanced, and we'll talk more about how the game itself will play out when we do our preview podcast later in the week.
I will sign off on this segment of the team list for the NRL with just a quick question to both of you, because I wanted to get Quinn's perspective on this. Obviously, there's a lot of football to play before round 4 rolls around. You got 3 games, 240 minutes. Is there a concern for Maika Sivo that Bailey Simonson and Morgan Harper figured the left edge out? If they have 3 strong games, what happens?
The short answer is yes. We spoke about this last week, John, and Mike has got himself in a precarious position where he's got himself suspended again. And it's far from ideal, but Morgan Harper and Bailey Simonson, who've been competing for the same spot, now find themselves in the position where they're playing together. And if that works, I think Maika is absolutely the odd man out that has to earn his way back into the side. The only way that Maika comes back in straight away at this point, if you ask me, is honestly if either one of Bailey or Morgan Harper have a Barry Croc or a consecutive Barry Crockers.
Yeah, look, I think the other thing too is just from my observations at training that those two in Morgan and Bailey look like they're reasonably tight, like they've become good mates. So I think the communication between them is going to be good. And the thing is that in rugby league, if you give someone else an opportunity to take your spot, especially if it's not just for 1 week, but the person's going to get your spot for a number of weeks, that's a risk you take. There could be consequences for it. Now, I've said before that there's 4 things that you'd mainly look at ticking off a winger, which is you want them to be, if they're given an opportunity to score in the red zone, you want them to be able to take it. And let's just say in Sivo's case, he's near unstoppable at times in the red zone. So you're looking for that I guess if not the unstoppability in the red zone, you want someone who is more than capable of turning a half chance into a full chance. All right. Secondly, you're looking for someone who's going to be safe under the high ball. Thirdly, you're looking for someone who's going to make decent, solid defensive reads and tackles. And finally, you're looking for someone who's going to be good on kick returns or in those sort of yardage meters. And I would say the Sivo we've seen in this past season and now probably ticks 2 boxes, being unstoppable in the red zone and being fairly safe under the high ball. Now, if you want to replace him, you have to get someone who's going to tick at least 3 boxes. And I guess it comes down to will Bailey Simonson tick 3 of those boxes? And I think if he does, he gives BA food for thought about whether that combination with he and Morgan Harper stays with him on the wing. So, interesting times, John. Good question.
Yeah, and we'll obviously dive into that more in the preview podcast, so look forward to that. For now, let's move on to the other 2 senior lists that we'll put out today. New South Wales Cup playing the Curtain Raiser at 3:05 p.m. out at Combank Stadium on Saturday, which unfortunately means it clashes with the Jersey Flegg. Great scheduling. But this is just, they never make it easy to be a football fan, do they? But in this case, this game is also broadcast on Foxtel, so make sure you catch that by either Foxtel or KO. And the Eels have named a team that has an interesting blend of young prospects and familiar names. We start at fullback Blaze Talangi, on the wings Isaac Lumi and Hayes Dunster. In the centres, returning from a very brief tenure or stint at the Tigers is Samuel Luizu, Zach Zini, the other centre. In the halves, Dejan Arce and Ethan Sanders, Offa Hickey Ogden and Kai Rodwell at bookends, Matt Arthur starting at dummy half. In the back row, Matt Dury and Luca Moretti on the edges. Interesting there. Maka Toa of the Maika variety at lock forward. Manny Luke, Dan Keir, Charlie Geimer and Brock Parker round out the 17. So obviously the notable young players in this team, Talangi, obviously Sanders, Arthur, Geimer and Parker. So they're the ones to watch out there in terms of development and making a name for themselves. Again, this sort of team was, I think, highlights some of our issues with depth in the back line. And also, some of the reasons to be excited with the development pathways with those young kids we mentioned just then. And yeah, most interesting in terms of the forward pack, Moretti on an edge, boys. I wonder if that's going to be for the 80 or if he'll be starting on the edge, moving to the lock forward role and then opening the way for someone like Geimer to come into the rotation. So I know what your takes are on it, but looking forward to this team, even if I don't think their ceiling's super high right now. They're going to have to obviously, I think, work hard and sort of prove themselves to the competition. But there's no doubting there are some talented players in this squad.
Yeah, look, I think there's when it comes to that, they didn't have apparently a very good trial, their last trial. The inclusion of Matt Arthur will probably make a difference in terms of the attack and just guiding that team around the park. He's got a great football brain, young Woods. So I'm going to be interested to see how that goes. I mean, the thing is, people who aren't out at the game, they get the opportunity to watch this because of the fact that it is covered on Fox. So you'll get a chance to have a look at some of the younger players as well as make an assessment about the Eels' depth. I guess the interesting one that isn't included is Ethan Martin, who doesn't appear in the team list. He's too old for Jersey Flegg. I'm not sure that he might be injured at the moment. Mm-hmm. So I haven't been able to confirm that. I'm not sure that he actually trained on Monday, but we do know that he is not age eligible for Flegg. So that's why you're not going to see him selected in Jersey Flegg. And you mentioned the return of Samuel Luizio. Now, Samuel hasn't been, he's been training with the players that train on I think on a Tuesday and Thursday night. He hadn't been part of the Eels pre-season. So whether he's one selection ahead of Ethan or whether Samuel's come in because Ethan is out injured, we can't say. But obviously, welcome back to Samuel. It's, as you said, it was a short time away doing the pre-season with the Tigers, but he's obviously been welcomed back with open arms to the Eels. And Samuel is, he is Australian schoolboys, talented junior player, had his issues with injuries coming through. So we just wish him well that he can get a season where he plays without having any injury concerns and get some consistent football this season. So, that's Clint. Anything you wanted to add about the New South Wales Cup?
It's awesome to have a genuine half there in Ethan Sanders. I know that there was a lot of playing around at the back end of last year after Jake Arthur defected to Manly, and the New South Wales Cup side last year obviously had a very mixed year, but there was a stronger start, and it's not coincidence that after Jake departed that their form started to slide. So it's good to see a genuine out-and-out halfback there in Ethan Sanders who can hopefully kick them out of trouble. It assists the guys like Deja and Arcee, and you touched on it before with Matt Arthur coming in the dummy half role. I think he's going to add plenty to the attack there. And look, there's the nucleus of a solid side there, but as Forty touched on, they're still going to have to work for it because, in particular against this dog side, which for the better part of the last probably 5-6 years at New South Wales Cup level has been very strong.
Yeah, and they've got plenty of good names in that team, sort of, I suppose, highlighted by Bronson Sherry. But if I just go through who the Eels will be up against, there's a couple of very talented youngsters from the Bulldogs in Josh Papali'i and the back rower Lapoi Hapoi. But Jarrell Skelton, Hayes Perham, Bronson Sherry, Bailey Biondi-Odo, Toby Sexton, Liam Knight, Jake Turpin. So it's a pretty solid
guys
team.
That have played a bit of first grade.
So guys that are capable of stepping up to NRL level, they're going to push the Eels here. And the big thing for me will be obviously be in attendance in person watching this one. And if you can't, like you said, 60s, watch it on Foxtel. The lessons for not so much Woods because he got knocked out in his first tackle, but the tough lessons learned by Ethan Sanders and Blaze Talangi through the preseason trials. I'm keen to see if that helps them reshape their focus in round one and if they can adapt their games and hit the ground running because of it. And if not, how fast they can adapt to senior football because it's going to be tough. Will Penasini, we remember how well he sort of took to the NRL, but he had a murderer's row of centres that he faced in the New South Wales Cup. And that made him, not like there was much doubting his talents. He was a supremely talented prospect, but that made him a better player. So Keen to see.
It was a very fast learning curve for Will Penasini at that level, because I remember the first, and this is in his debut NRL year. This is at the beginning of
Yes,
that season.
correct.
Probably the first month in New South Wales Cup,
He
he
is.
struggled.
Yeah, and
But
he
found
was
his
up
feet
against
very quickly.
that for whatever reason, between like injury, suspension, or just bad form, he constantly found himself up against either NRL or even rep caliber centres in Regis. So it was a great crash course for him, and hopefully the likes of Talangi, Sanders, Arthur, Geimer, and Parker can get the same sort of experience and become better players for it.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
absolutely true. So, fellas, when you get onto this Flegg game now, 40, I've just received a text with a late change around the venue and the time. So
Ooh, there we go.
I'll let you run. I'll let you run through the team.
Oh, it's been
I'll
updated
hit you
on the
with
website now. I can see. Yeah, so formally taking place at 3:05 p.m. or 3 o'clock p.m. Sorry, at a New Era Stadium. It is now kicking off at 1:30 p.m. Eric Tweedow Stadium, and I don't know if that means I can make it still, but the Eels putting together what looks to be a pretty exciting Flegg team, boys. I'm actually really keen to eventually get a chance to see this team go around. Lots of familiar faces with a sprinkling of new guys in the back line and on the interchange. Looks like it's a very strong forward pack, which is always a good starting point in any competition, let alone the Flegg. But we start, as always, at fullback. One of the standouts in the SG Ball Premiership team, Arpa Tweedle. On the flanks, got a couple of new boys in Tamarere Simons and Charlie Skorovi. I believe Charlie comes to us via Union, and I think Simons is a former Bulldog. I'm not sure about that one, but Araz Namba. There's a returning Eel right there in the centres, alongside Eric Va'afor-Sanga. Sorry if I got that wrong, Eric. In the halves, Josh Lynn, another one of those SG Ball Premiership winners. Actually ended up playing a bit of Cup last year and did okay. And then we've got another newcomer in Mitchell Chester, who I think is a Central Coast boy maybe. I'm not sure. But then in the forward pack, these are all names we know. Sam Tuivasa and Saxon Pryke, two outstanding prospects there. Got to see a little bit of them in the preseason. Well, not Sam's case, but Saxon we did. Riley Smith joined the Eels from the Panthers. He'll be at dummy half. In the back row, a trio of returning Flegg core players in Will Latu, Jock Brazel, and Max Tupou. On the interchange, Paddy Spence will be the utility player, and then another trio of big boppers, Lance Forlima and LeBron Tuala. Well, we both know them. They were very good in the SG Ball. Well, what we got to see of LeBron was encouraging before he did a nasty hand injury, and Lance is one of the core players in the pack. And a newcomer from North Queensland in Damascus Nemia. Cracking name, Damascus. I hope your nickname is
Great
Steel.
name.
Good old Damascus Steel there. And unlucky to miss out, but I suppose speaking to the quality of the forward pack, at 18th man is Will Lewis. And I imagine he's going to get a run at some point via injury, suspension or form and make the most of his chance. But yeah, really fun-looking Flegg team. And like I said, probably won't get to see him this week, but really looking forward to when I eventually do get to see him without a clash of scheduling.
Yeah, it's going to be touch and go for you, 40, with being there, because I was looking at that, and if you want to be at the stadium, Combank Stadium, for the start of the New South Wales Cup, it doesn't leave you too much in travel time and time to park, that sort of thing.
If I got the old Dave Warner helicopter, maybe, but with my conventional four-wheel transport.
Well, you just willed a venue and time change into existence, so I don't put this beyond your powers, Forty.
The other thing too is, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I do know of someone who will be at Granville, and they're going to park at Paraleagues, catch an Uber to Granville, and then catch an Uber back, so they don't have to worry too much about parking when they arrive, say, during the New South Wales Cup game. So
that's solid logic. Can't fault that.
Yeah, so that is an option. Look, I think like you, John, I'm very curious to be able to see these some of these new players. So I'll be out there at Granville Park at Eric Tweedale Stadium for the girls with the Lisa Fiola Cup and Tasha Gale Cup earlier in the day, but I think it's just cutting it too fine to be able to then stay and watch the Flegg. I guess we'll see what happens time-wise while we're there, but yeah, very keen to see how these players go. It's really, I think it's an imposing pack, and there's probably some players who are part of that squad that were unlucky not to be selected this week. I noticed the Twins haven't been selected in this game.
They're
So
the two Spit boys, yeah. So, I mean, that's a good sign of depth, which is what you want to see. We know that injury and suspension always play a part. And, yeah, if the Eels can hit the ground running, and the Dogs have been pretty good in this grade too, so this will be another good contest for them. And, yeah, once we do get to see them in action, be very keen to see how they play.
Yep, absolutely.
Alrighty, that's the team list previews or micro previews done, boys. Let's pump straight into the junior rep wrap-up. 4 games out at Eric Tweedale, the aforementioned stadium, on the weekend. We got the full range of results. We got wins, we got losses, we got a draw. So the Eels bagging 2 wins, a draw, and a loss across the Fiola, Gale, Matthews, and Ball. We'll start with the Lisa Fiola, who are in an absolutely impressive stretch of form right now. They dusted up the St. George Dragons 44-0. Try scorers Rarani with a hattie, Fontaine Tafua bagging a double alongside Bowie Marchong, Maika Sivo. We got that right, 60s. Our eyes didn't deceive us. And Kelly Andrews alongside 2 goals for Sharon Latapu and 2 goals for Bowie Marchong, shutting out the Dragons to 0. This was a comprehensive team performance. After the stumble against the Bulldogs in round 1, 60s, they've been going from strength to strength and looking more and more like the team that we were anticipating they were shaping up as coming into this season. And they play fast and physical, big forwards. Tafua and Leonia Vay in the middle are outstanding. They've got dynamic dummy halves, with Bowie Marchong being a real live wire jumping out of dummy half. And, yeah, just a good, well-rounded backline and halves. So it's a good team, and they're really starting to find their gear.
Yeah, and I think it was a very tough opponent in the Bulldogs in round 1.
They're the best team in this competition. Obvious,
yeah. When you watch how the difference in how they played in that first round to how they executed in that 44-0 drubbing of the Dragons, they really just didn't seem to have the rhythm in attack in that first round. It was a game where it just didn't happen for them, but they're building now, and they're getting better every week. Lots of errors too in that first week, but it's all coming together now.
Yeah, they're really shaping up nice in this competition. Bulldogs are the ladder leaders in the Lisa Fiola, so they're the benchmark the Eels have to chase. But I do look forward to a potential rematch there because they're a much better team than what we saw in round 1, and I think they're building nicely. Coming to the second game of the day, it was the Tarsha Cup, and this one was the game we sort of entered with our breaths bated because it was the bottom of the ladder clash between the Eels and the Dragons, neither team having bagged the win. And in the Dragons' case, fellas, they hadn't bagged the point in attack. And so were the Eels going to be the team to not only bleed a point but maybe bleed the first win for the Dragons? No. They are in the same mood as their younger counterparts in the Fiola. They were hungry for the clean sheet with a 36-blot win over the Dragons. Easily their best performance of the season. Try scorers, the dummy half, Mueller, with a brace. I thought she was very good. The front row, Liana Dimmick and lock Riva Lee Allo also getting in there. Halfback, Aaliyah Hamano, Khaleesi Mahe prop forward, and Ciara Stockham on debut. Try scorers, Bella Sanford bagging 3 goals, with Dallas Graham-Wivel tacking on 1 as well. This was easily their best performance of the season. Controlled possession and territory, much better than they have in the previous 3 weeks prior. They looked like a good unit. Forwards were dominating. Mahe and Dimmick were excellent. I thought the backs took their opportunities. The dummy halves were really strong. The only problem I've got with this, boys, is that they have a legitimately sort of platform-building win, and it's a win where if you look at the ladder, they're actually not, assuming that it is a top 8 competition, because I can't tell, they're actually back in the hunt for the finals with this win. But they meet the Roosters Indigenous Academy next week. That is the only negative about this whole thing, is that they have planted a flag and look to be building, and now they've got to meet the best next week.
Yeah, and there just is no escaping how good the Roosters are. And when you think it is a tough start to the season, when there are 2 absolute standout teams in the competition. They finished first and second in the Gale last year, being the Roosters and the Bulldogs. And to get both of them in the first 5 matches of the season, there will be clubs that don't have to play them.
I will say this. The Seagulls managed to ambush the Roosters last week. It was an understrength Roosters, though. So whether the Eels can do the same, or if the Roosters backing up from that stinging loss look for a little bit of extra effort, it remains to be seen. But this is probably this will be a season-defining game for the Eels in the Tarsha Gale. If they can spring the upset, they put themselves firmly back in the hunt for the finals and know that they can legitimately mix it with the best in the competition.
Look, there are aspects of their play that, as I've said before, I can see the skill development that's happening with the players. The second phase play that to me has been the standout. I think the halves are working really well, but the forwards, they can really lay a great platform in these games. And the thing is, they're their own worst enemy. They just drop too much ball.
Yep.
And in those losses this year, they were having times where, like, they just never completed enough sets to put any defensive pressure on the opposition. And it was a shame, because you'd see them when they were working downfield. You could see them bending the defence line. You could see them making inroads, and then next thing there's a turnover.
And it just breaks the back.
Absolutely. But it was good to see that the positivity that they had. Now, obviously, they went into the game believing they were going to win this, as they probably should go into every game believing that. But I guess especially so given the struggles that the Dragons were having. But as you said, John, this next game could well be season-defining, and let's have fingers crossed for that. But, mate, controversy.
Yeah, I was about you preempted me beautifully. The most controversial result on the day, the one that gave us the trifecta of results with the win, the loss, and the draw. Eels and the Dogs in a top-of-the-table match in the Mats, drawing 20-all. Eels burst out the blocks with a great try to Samuel Polly with a terrific kick chase. They then got tries either side of Oranges to Cyrus Bloomfield and Ezra Leota to take what looked to be a commanding lead in this game, but the Dogs hit back with a couple of late tries. Then got into a position to win this game on the back of, you say controversial, and I think you rather tactfully handled it as a disputed call in your match report. But
yes.
I blew up on the day because I thought it was pretty clearly a tipped pass forwards from one player to another Bulldogs player when they were on the attack in Parramatta's red zone, and the missed knock-on, or equivalent to a knock-on there, escalated into Cyrus Bloomfield getting sent off for whether it was dissent or bringing the game into disrepute for verbals to the ref. Regardless, it was a penalty to the Dogs about a metre or two to the right of the sticks from about 12 metres out. It was as throw over as it gets, and somehow they managed to hit the left upright, and the wherewithal of young Ryder Talangi to grab that ball off the post over his shoulder was obviously game-defining. And I think, given the context of what we saw at the end, the Eels would take the draw. They won't be happy with it, though, because they were in ascendancy in this game, let it slip, and yes, the Bulldogs are a talented team, but the Eels had the better of most of the exchanges up until that last quarter.
Well, look, the other side of it is, this is a very young Eels team. I believe there's about 6 or 7 in this team
first year
that are playing
players, yeah,
that are able to run around again next year. So they're only going to turn 16 later this year. I believe Cyrus is one of those, and he's, from what I can recall, he's late in the year, like really late in the year that he turns 16. So he's quite young. I think you were even tactful in what you said just then about those calls in that frantic play. So just to give people some sort of idea, the ball, the Bulldogs were on, had just had their 4th tackle. They're inside Parramatta's red zone. There's about 2 minutes or so to go. They've gone to the right. Then they've offloaded, gone across to the left. A pass has been unable to be taken by one of their players. He's got a hand to it, and it's popped up in the air. And then another player has run through and caught it. So it was, to me, we called it live as a knock on. Like, we're like, what's going on there? And people were thinking, oh, it must have been the same player that caught it. He's tapped it up in the air and caught it. No, it was two different players. That was confirmed on video. And then the ball then got flung across field again towards the right. It hit, a pass went a bit high on the Bulldogs player that was receiving it. It was coming over the back of his shoulder. An Eels player tackled him as it's coming off his shoulder. The ref has judged it as being touched by the Eels player. My take on what I could see was that the Bulldogs player was losing it and the tackle drove the player and the ball flying backwards. You know, I don't want to say that it couldn't have touched the Eels player's hands, but there was shock as the call was made for 6 again, because all the players that were around the play turned around like as soon as the call was made, because the Bulldogs player had recovered, so they thought it was going to be the last tackle there. It wasn't a dispute about a knock-on. They just thought they've lost it backwards, they've recovered. The fifth tackle's now being played on the 30-metre mark instead of inside the red zone. And then that's when it's been alleged that young Cyrus has directed a comment at the referee, been sent, and it goes from there. So
the good news
I
is
guess
there was
any audio.
no suspension, though. He's been named to play this week. So whatever
Yeah,
happened has
I
been dealt
don't
with.
know whether he's been cited or whether he's been cleared. I'd sort of heard he'd been cited, so I don't know whether they've had the chance to have a hearing. I would imagine if they believe, and I think they do believe, that it wasn't a comment directed at the young referee, the young girl, that they would challenge it. But I mean, we're going off a lot of things that were said on the day and what we saw. But it was a very controversial. And look, I think the Eels, that first half was really clunky, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was without question the Bulldogs were aiming to put the Parramatta team off their game. There was a little bit extra going into the tackles from what I could see, and maybe nothing too illegal, but it was a real roughhouse game in that first half.
We did see a try of the year contender for the Eels on halftime.
Yes.
Ezra Leota sparking.
How out of the blue was that,
yeah,
mate?
Ezra Leota with literally a second or two left on the clock. We sort of were ready to get up and stretch and do our halftime chat, and then he just bursts out of dummy half, steps through some players, gets an offload away, creates a second offload, which ends up leading to Cyrus Bloomfield just hitting the afterburners and torching the Dogs. So fantastic little team interplay there, and unfortunately didn't lead to the win, but at least the Eels banked the point and remain undefeated on the season. A team that did lose, however, was the SG Boar, and it was probably their worst loss of the season, falling to the Bulldogs 32-16. Mo Almadine, Jai Camilleri, and Javan Stevenson-Haller scoring tries, 2 from 3 for Dom from the tee. This makes it back-to-back losses for the Eels, and they need to address the issues now, because I believe they take on the Knights next week, who are another good team in this competition. So 60s, they've got to really tidy up their completion rates, their discipline, and just get back to the sort of football they were playing at the start of the season, where they were building nicely and finishing games much stronger than their opponents.
Oh, look, completions. It's that straightforward. A few unnecessary penalties as well. It's just every time that it looked like they were going to start to build some momentum in the game, they turn the ball over. And you just cannot do that. And to be fair, they even did that in the first few rounds where they got wins, but they found that capacity to fight back and get the victory. But in this game, those errors continued all the way through the second half, didn't they? It was it just didn't abate in any way, and you can't turn over that much ball. And the Dogs had only won one game before this, so they should have been able to, at their best, win this game, the Eels. But instead, as I said, they were their own worst enemy. So
And now we can get Clint back in off the interchange bench and get him back into the podcast after the junior reps recap. A couple of bits of para news, Quint. I'll get you to run down them with me. But we all know about Sean Lane's horror year last year. He ended up going on a bit of an introspective journey of self-discovery in the off-season, sort of touring across Europe. And we mentioned, I think, maybe the last podcast about the potential for the club to bring out the documentary. And there's now actually a teaser trailer up online about what he went through last year and how he sort of approaches his life and his career mentally, given that he's studying a master's in positive psychology. So he's a very interesting figure, had a very interesting career prior to arriving at the Eels, and the way he's built himself up, it really is fascinating.
Very much so, and this will be a interesting delve into the psyche of a professional athlete. We're talking everything from preparation through to playing to recovery, and obviously you touched on the injury woes of Sean Lane there. Overcoming adversity is one of the big things, and I think something like this is fantastic. There's going to be points of, I guess, not just relevantness. Oh, if I invented a word there, but I guess points of comparison for every person, no matter their struggle. And there'll be a takeaway from this, because you're hearing this as a first-hand account of someone who's at the peak of their professional sport, being that they are a full-time professional player, overcoming the challenges. And look, challenges is something that's part of every human's life. And it's all relative to the challenges that you're experiencing. And I really, really like and appreciate these types of things, because as I said, there's a point of relativeness there for everyone, and there's a point of I guess like a connection, and people can see through his own struggles, maybe a way and a path that they can manage some of their own struggles. And I'm very big on this stuff, boys. I'm excited to see this one.
It's going to be a really interesting watch, and he travels across France, Spain, Italy, Netherlands and England, and meets some legitimately impressive professionals. Former Socceroos captain Matt Ryan, the very good goalkeeper. I played the music, but the 2023 World Darts Championship, Michael Smith, going back to Chasing the Sun there. Jeremy Snape, sports psychologist and retired cricketer. Aaron Walsh, who's a Scotland involved in Scottish rugby with their mental skills. And then Crystal Palace Football Club psychologist Sion Thomas. So he's getting some legitimately interesting collaborators there. And yeah, just the importance of promoting not just the struggles, but the taking a positive approach to your struggles and overcoming it, I think is a nice tonic to what we saw coming out of Vegas, which we'll talk about later, and how that can better yourself as a person. So really looking forward to this one. Other news for the Eels, bit of housekeeping, more good sponsorship extensions. Actron Air 3-year re-up on the Eels there. They've been part of the kit for a while now, and always good to see the on-field and off-field, talk about positive culture, but the positive culture for the Eels been reflected in their sponsorship, boys. So that's another good one. And 60s, before we do finish with the Eels news, you do have a bit of somber news to share.
Yeah, it was noted on the Eels official sites last week, the passing of John Moran. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do the podcast last week and didn't get an opportunity to speak about that. That news came through to me early last week via both the Eels letting me know and also the BGA, Blue and Gold Alliance, that is. John Moran, my vivid memories of John, he arrived at the Eels in 74, and obviously I've been going to watch the Eels since the 60s. And John was one of those players who was in and out of first grade and reserve grade over his entire career while he was at the club, and he played some first grade in 74 and 75, but then in 76 he again was that was what he faced, was being called up for some games, but he got called up right at the end of the season, and he hit what I thought was his peak form and peak performance for the Eels in their run to the grand final in 76. So he was playing out in the centres, and the run of games that he had when he came in, I think it might have been round 21, and there were 22 rounds back then because it was a 12-team competition. So he came in round 21, and the Eels won that game, round 22. Then they won their finals matches in the lead up to the grand final, and he was on fire out in the centres because he was a big bullocking centre, and it was John Moran that created the space for Neville Glover when that pass was thrown to him. In fact, there was a little bit of debate whether John should have just kept going on his own to score that try rather than to pass out to Neville Glover. It was a bit touch and go. He went for what he considered was the best option, which was the pass to Neville. As we know, the ball went down, but he nonetheless played a great grand final and a great end of the season. Sadly, he's passed away. He was Eel 323.
Yes.
He continued for another year at the Eels to 1977 before he finished up. He'd played for the Panthers before he was at the Eels. No doubt the people from both the Panthers and the Eels would be mourning his loss, not to mention, of course, his friends and family. We send our deepest condolences to the friends and the family of John Moran. And as I said, I'll cherish those memories that I have of one of the players that was instrumental in taking the Parramatta Eels to their very first grand final back in 1976.
Well said, mate. Now, we keep the show moving on as always, and I think it's fair to say that we're probably past the halfway point, given that this is a particularly heavily Parramatta-laden podcast with the NRL split coming now. But getting back to where we were a couple of weeks ago when we were still on the podcast, Sixties, we just opened the door to Europe. We came back with the funk last week because Will Penasini's afro just, it was beautiful. And Sean Lane probably gives me the perfect way to segue back to our virtual Kentucky tour of the big continent. Not to get too political this week, because I didn't realise this this is a song that I've known for ages, and I didn't realise that the artist holds dual Ukrainian-Russian citizenship. But we're going towards the Eastern Bloc in Europe to an artist called Vitas, who has an incredibly unique style that I can't really give a proper description of. So I'll just play the music, and you can tell me what instrument you think he's using for his sound effects. What instrument do you reckon he was using to get those little trills going?
Was it simply his own voice?
Yeah, he was. Wasn't blowing a raspberry, but he was doing like the rapid articulation of his tongue to make that little trill. So, Vitas, the Seventh Element. It's a very out there track, fully in vibe with Eurovision, I imagine. But it's a interesting one. So, the Seventh Element by Vitas, if you want to follow that one up. All right,
John, I've just been thinking, a bit of lateral thinking here.
Oh yeah, this is the perfect segment for it. Hit me with it.
So we can imagine there's let's say that we find that we have nothing to say at a Leagues Club podcast.
start.
You could turn our
start the
podcast
DJ into
a DJ session,
Eurovision rave, yeah.
Yeah, and just compile everything that you've been putting together.
It'll be the perfect set.
We just have to arrange with the club to get the lighting happening. So
we can
maybe mirror ball, a strobe.
We can actually keep a Spotify playlist for the season intermission music and post it at the end for anyone anyone that's keen on the most crazy, random, esoteric playlist I've ever had. So
what will be interesting, John, will be when you do that, seeing how many plays it gets.
Most of them be for me, I'm sure. Alrighty, boys. Obviously, what's dominating the headlines right now in the NRL is all the fallout from the trip to Vegas. We had the 2 games, and on the whole, I think it's fair to say the NRL took 2 really big steps forwards before falling on their face. Now they have to pick themselves up because of the fallout from late in the game against the Roosters and the Broncos. But the Vegas venture, Sixties, we're going to speak to Ron in a special podcast to follow up to our survival guide that we had with him last week. But how do we feel about it, boys? 2 games played in the doubleheader. I think it was a tick under 41K at Allegiant Stadium. We had the pre-game stuff with NRL 360, the sort of the fan catch-ups. Did the NRL get it right? Did we like what we saw for the product? What do you want to talk about here?
Okay, so I want to talk about 2 aspects. First of all, there's the marketplace in Australia, and the NRL absolutely dominated with having the season openers over in Vegas, because we've already had Fox talking about their record ratings, but it's just been the media coverage where no other sport in Australia is going to get that sort of media coverage.
Not a
that
chance.
Sort of, that happened with this round 1. So aside from anything else, and we had Volandis was talking about how it was really a very cost-effective venture anyway, with all the money that came into the game as part of this promotion and exposure. So he's saying it's cost-effective. Well, man, it moved the needle in Australia. It moved the media needle like rarely it's ever happened before. So first of all, locally, it's just kicked major goals as far as that's concerned. Secondly, as far as the international market is concerned, we know that it was overwhelmingly Australians and then English people that were over there at the game. There's probably Kiwis as well, but a lot of Australians, a large number of English people, Super League people that went over there for the promotion. So there was big tourism that was taken there, and probably more tourism than there was locals that were at the game. However, there were locals at the game. There was local media coverage through the broadcasting as well into the United States. It's a long-term plan, and I think it was put succinctly. It was either Volandis or Andrew Abdo who said about if they can just get like a small, like 1%,
A toehold.
a toehold over there, the revenue stream that would be created would be astronomical for the game. Now, there wasn't talk about expansion as part of that. There wasn't talk about developing the code in America in terms of locally, but I think it's developing an awareness and maybe a passion for a number of people over there. Then once you start to get that brand awareness and then start to familiarise people with not just the senior form of the game, but the safe junior forms of the game, and give that as an option for developing players. It's a much longer process to develop the game over there in terms of getting locals that are playing it, whether you can get a team over there that participates in the Super League or you know, like a lower level game competition happening over there. I mean, they've been working on that for decades upon decades. David New has been one of the pioneers over there, and thankfully he's also getting a bit of recognition for the work that he's done. But look, I think it was a winner on a lot of fronts, but I think especially so on our local market. Clint, what do you think?
It's hard to add much more to what you said there, but tick, 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 tick. for the Vegas venture. This is one of the few times I can actively recall seeing the rugby league media united and positive all week long, or probably the fortnight, month leading in almost. We're so used to drama and clickbait and there being problems in rugby league. And obviously there was one that came out of Vegas that we'll touch on a little bit later. But, it was just great to see us not trying to cannibalize and criticize unfairly our game, and that the media was absolutely selling the product as they should. And I thought there were two really good quality games. Geez, the first 10-15 minutes of the South Manly clash was a great advertisement.
Almost Origin tier. It was violent in the best possible way. It was great.
Yeah.
I suppose, boys.
Like, it felt like if you were local. Sorry, I was just going to say, it felt like if you were a local that was being exposed to this for the first time, you're like, I'm digging what I'm seeing.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. I mean, again, there's obviously the controversy we'll talk about and quite seriously talk about because that's the nature of the issue. But I think on the whole, if you take away and isolate that one negative, you really have to, give the NRL their daps here. They've done a fantastic job. They don't always do a fantastic job, but they did a very good job. Even the directive, I think, to the officials to maybe err on the side of a freer game. I know that there was a lot of talk about what about consistency for the product and whatnot, but it's a showcase. Like, you need to present your best possible product. And it had me thinking, because I know there's a 5-year plan at Vegas and there's going to be a carousel of NRL clubs and probably going to be more that want to come to the table given the success now of the initial round zero. Does that change the timeline for the NRL? Like, obviously the Vegas 5-year plan is still there, but do they now start thinking, okay, well, we've got the doubleheader at Vegas, but we need to be hitting the Western Seaboard in LA and the Eastern Seaboard in New York the same way. Like, we need doubleheaders in those venues, whether it's MetLife or whatever it is in New York and, the new stadium for LA, I can't remember, SoCal, I think, or SoLife, something like that.
Yeah.
It's, I guess it's that trying to get a balance that where you don't dilute your impact as well.
Yep.
It's because I think they maybe would have created a little bit of an appetite for it. I think on 360 tonight, Kent showed a clipping from the New York Post, was it? I think.
Yes. Yep.
And where it was like the most glowing review of a game that you would get from someone who wasn't entirely familiar with the game. So
there was also a really good write-up from a San Francisco 49ers beat writer. And for those who aren't familiar with what beat writers are, whereas in Australia you have general media that just deal with everything NRL, because there's such big markets in America, you have journos dedicated to specific teams. And so this guy does the 49ers, and this is what he really liked from it. He liked the sportsmanship, the brutality being contrasted against, good nature, except obviously for the one incident. He liked breakaway plays, obviously the Jason Saab intercept, and also Jason Saab getting gunned down. He liked, and this is a really weird one from our perspective, locker room cameras, like being able to see the team, revving up for the game, because the locker room's sacred in American sports. You don't get a chance to look into it. He liked the captain's challenge, how it's implemented versus the NFL. He liked bunker replays, which is a big issue in America with how they do their stuff. He liked trainers being on the field, like just having rapid access to medical assistance in that regard. And he just liked the smiles, and I suppose that's true for the NRL. Is that I know that it's weird saying that in the backdrop of what happened with Spencer Leniu, but in general, the game is played with a good degree of sportsmanship. What he didn't like, or what he struggled with, was clarification on the rules and how they handled it at the venue, which is not a surprise. Why players can't steal the ball, and I suppose explaining the one-on-one strip it's one of those weird nuances in the game. Why don't teams attempt more field goals in the middle of the field? And that's actually a discussion I've been wanting to have in terms of expected points per possession. If you could knock field goals over consistently, where it ranks versus just completing your set. And then the issue with, and this was outside the NRL's control, but the fact that because a college basketball game ran overtime, they didn't get to start on Fox Sports 1 and had to go to Fox Sports 2 as a bridge broadcast. So that's just bad luck. So it's a really good read, actually. Where is it? Let me go find it for you. It's up on Code Sports, I believe, which you may or may not have to pay for. But
Okay.
it's a good read, and yeah, it's always great to get insight from the locals, like you said for that NY Post article as well.
You know what? You mentioned that field goals. Guess why the field goal was reduced to 1 point?
Yeah, because if you're good at it, it is. I mean, it's a problem that plagues rugby union, is the ability to just chip away penalties and field goals like that.
Well, of course, back then the try was also worth 3 points, and when you had a player like Eric Sims for South Sydney,
sharpshooter,
knock over
Made a career out of it.
Yeah, I mean, why go for potentially 3 points, and when you could have someone who could knock over a field goal worth 2, and kick a couple of field goals, and you overtake someone who's kicked an unconverted try. It's
true.
I mean, so I mean, it was a big thing. I think it was a big thing to introduce the 2-point field goal again for the long range shots. But look, I guess the where we see an underuse of the field goal is when you've got possession and the clock is counting down into the last minutes of a half, and you think, well, why not knock over a point? I mean, that classic with Jared Hayne where he took that against the Broncos, when he took that audacious penalty kick that he drove deep downfield and then rushed up, took the tap, and just calmly potted an angled field goal. And I think it ended up being the difference, didn't it, with the teams?
It was.
Game.
It was.
19-0 at halftime, I think it was, and then 19-18, I think, at full time.
Yeah. So those sorts of moments, and you think, and you do see it from time to time where teams that will have that last play for the field goal. But it's. I hope we don't see too much in the way of field goals, because we don't want rugby.
You don't need to revisit that part of the past.
No. So
one point I saw.
John, I was just going to say, just to circle back to your question in terms of location. I think Vegas is the right spot at the moment. Having been someone that's been fortunate enough to frequent the US, Los Angeles is, if you haven't visited, it is probably the most gridlocked traffic city in the world. And like in trying to travel distance to time ratio, it is so hard to get around, and there's complete lack of public transport across the US in general. They're a very car dependent society, and so getting to Sophie Stadium there in Inglewood would be incredibly difficult, particularly given where people would be potentially staying. Likewise in New York, even though it's a lot easier to get around, and you've got that spread across the main island there, and some of the hotels there, actually a lot of the hotels there are very cost prohibitive. In Nevada, because they have limited taxes, a state tax that is, you're not actually paying that much for your hotel rooms, and so it becomes a very enticing proposition for people who are traveling and tourism to go there and watch the games. And that's probably why you saw the level of Australians and British supporters that went out to the game. Likewise, with it being the unofficial entertainment capital of the world and essentially a 24/7 city, it is the best location. And I'd really like to see the NRL consolidate and build on the position they've established this year, and probably look to do so for a number of years yet. Obviously, they got the 5-year deal before they look to venture to anywhere else.
Yeah, interesting takes there, mate, and I can see why you're saying that as well. And I guess during these first 5 years, maybe the push comes from trying to get that broadcast interest, stronger broadcast interest in the
entertainment. Selling the entertainment of the game and the sport is absolutely the forefront of everything they should be doing in these formative years.
One interesting concept I saw on Reddit, boys, before we get into the games themselves and do a recap there was, and part of it would be embracing American culture. Part of it is also just creating better fidelity and clarity of who the players are. Is should we take a step towards the NFL and maybe for the NRL in general, but especially for the rounds played in Vegas or other cities if they do expand that way, and start embroidering player surnames on jerseys.
Yeah, well,
Ooh. That's a very good question, because I absolutely understand the case for it, but I think with surnames on the back of jerseys might have a little bit of a negative connotation for some league fans, Sixties, because of the Super League wall.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's an interesting question, like weighing up helping the American audience identify players and adopt a favorite player faster. And it's weird because, like, I say weird, there's almost a great window here because you think of someone like a Tebojevic, which we think would be an alien name to the American market, but you look at the obviously you got tennis with Jokic, Nikola Jokic, but in basketball, Novak Djokovic. In NBA, they've got two outstanding Eastern European players in Nikola Jokic and the Dallas Mavericks. Oh my God! It's Luka Doncic. So like that, they'd be willing to get on board for a name like Dvojevic and be quite familiar with it.
The Serbian culture is strong there.
Yeah, so I think it's an intriguing idea, and it might help with merch sales in America eventually. But yeah, one thing to sort of digest and think about for next year. But let's get to the games themselves, boys. Seagulls 36 over the Rabbitohs 24, and Roosters 20 over the Broncos 10. Would you say it's a pair of surprises? I know I tipped Seagulls, but I also tipped.
Yeah, we were both very, very happy with going Manly in that first one.
But,
well, I think I might have even went for the 13 plus to Manly when I'm back when we were talking to Ron.
Curse you, Richie Kenner.
Preview.
He
so
ended up being 12 points of difference, and I thought Manly were pretty good. Rabbitohs had their moments, but I think Lachlan Ilya struggled a bit to control the game. Not to say that Daly Evans was in his prime in this one too. I think the field dimensions might have hurt his radar after kicking a little bit, but we got to see Jason Saab in full flight before his hammy got shot, which was unfortunate.
What's the update on that?
I haven't seen an updated report. It did not look good though. He was struggling, and that's actually a surprisingly significant blow for Manly, because a lot of their attacking plays are built around utilising his rare speed and height. We got to see Luke Brooks, good and bad. He had a couple of false starts and then had a really nice near try set up for Tom Tebojevic on the double under inside ball, and also scored the match sealer. Outside of that, Olakwatu was good. The Tebojeviches as a trio were pretty solid. Anyone else stand out to you boys in this one?
Look, I think I think you've covered Manly quite well. I just have a real uncertainty about the Rabbitohs. Last year,
they're teetering, aren't they?
Last year I tipped them to not make the 8, and I think now that I'm even just watching this first round, looking at where they fall down in games, they just have patches where they go complete, not just off the boil, but it's almost like their weaknesses are exposed in a game, and
quicksand, and then it falls apart like quicksand.
Yeah, like they really do have patches where they fall apart, and they had a couple of games last year where entire games fell apart.
Yeah,
and then, but even when they're winning, they go through those patches where they almost lose complete control of the game, and sometimes they're lucky that the opposition doesn't do a very good job. I mean, we demolished them in a game where I think a lot of people thought they were going to.
I think we thought we were going to get demolished. Going back to my prediction
last week, that we're the ones that broke South, because it's almost since that performance that we've been left with the South that we've seen for the better part of the last 8-9 months.
Yeah, because there were reports that in the weeks prepping for Parramatta, South Sydney. No, I mean, I don't use the term cocky as if it was like a negative, because they deservedly should have plenty of self-belief attacking the Eels, but they just knew they had the mental edge over us, and I think that game was a bit of a reset in a negative way for South Sydney, so we can take some ownership there. But It's also a reminder that Manly with a healthy Tom Tebojevic are always a threat. South Sydney definitely have some soul searching to do because between the loss to us and the litany of off-field issues that sort of dogged them in the back end of 2023 about favouritism towards players and certain players not seeing eye to eye, I don't know if they've cleared the air on that one yet. So they've got more to prove than most teams, and they didn't start off in a great manner. In the other game, and unfortunately this is the one we have to talk about, the racial incident, but the Roosters springing, I'd say, an upset over the Broncos here. I thought the Broncos were going to be formidable off their preseason form. It wasn't like they were terrible, but they weren't in full gear by any means, and the Roosters got a bit of a sucker punch on them with a reminder that, yes, this Roosters team has some serious strike power. Today, I thought Teddy was okay, but Joseph Manu was at his imperious best. He absolutely baptised Selwyn Cobbo down that sideline. We got to see, Sam Walker being, I wouldn't say fantastic, but he was industrious and kept himself busy. Lindsay
Terrell May was very impressive off the bench.
Yeah. I think he's the oldest of the May brothers, but he's a good prop forward. Victor Radley managed to contain the rage and play a good game. The only real concern for the Roosters, I think, is that young star Sua Wong might have had an injury on this one. I didn't see an updated report, but he left the game at one point, not looking too sharp. So, yeah, the Roosters are a reminder that they are a good team, a reminder that even when they suck, inverted commas, that they've still got plenty of representative players. The Broncos, they've got some work to do. They weren't on the same page. I thought Reece Walsh, he had a couple of electrifying touches, but he wasn't anywhere near his best. Selwyn Cobbo, I'm not going to put a red line for him in the centres right now, Sixties or Clint, but that was a welcome to the most difficult defensive position in the game sort of moment, going up against an absolute stud in Joey Manu. And, yeah, the Broncos weren't at their best. It wasn't helped by Brendan Piakura. Did he have a concussion?
Yeah, they really struggled with that, and Patrick Carrigan having to fill in on the edge. Obviously, his lateral movement isn't as good as Piakura's, so he was targeted. He was absolutely targeted.
Yes.
Yeah, look, it looked like at no stage did Brisbane seem to have any attacking mojo.
Yeah. It's like they couldn't fire a shot. It's like the gun was blocked. It was
Yeah. So for the time being, I'm going to put that down as just early season clunkiness.
Oh, yeah.
It just
for sure.
It just didn't happen for them. I'm still saying, I'm sticking to what I said about South, because I think that's a trait that's there within their team, and I haven't seen that change. But the Broncos, I thought, this may well be something that they'll overcome pretty quickly. And as for the Roosters, well, I guess that's the Roosters playing at what maybe close to the best, if not the best football, the style of football they're going to play when they're at their best this year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel that.
That's their optimum modus operandi, if you like. Players executing pretty much as they needed to against an opposition that never really hit any heights. And I guess if you were talking about anything from the Roosters from a negative perspective, is that the Broncos were seemingly so off their game that maybe you would have liked to have seen a bit more from the Roosters. I don't know. I mean, especially...
It's always hard to gauge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So I didn't think the game was the same quality as the Manly and South Sydney game, but it was certainly... that the first game was certainly far more entertaining. The start of that game was breathtaking. It was almost like watching Origin. That's when Origin is just ripping in, and there's no stoppage in play. It just seems to flow from one end to the other. And so I don't know. For me, the team that got the biggest tick out of the weekend was Manly.
Agreed. I mean, that's the biggest takeaway.
For sure.
And
so I guess we have to touch on that topic, don't we?
We talked about taking two big strides forwards of these two games and then almost falling on your face. And the nature of this one was it's a alleged steal, but has been referred directly to the judiciary, which would mean that there's probably some substantive evidence. But late in the game, Spencer Leniu, I don't even know what sparked it. It was in back play. he had a confrontation with young gun Ezra Mam, and unfortunately, Mam has alleged that in that verbal joust that Leniu referred to Mam as a monkey, which is I've seen people try and spin this on social media as nothing serious, but we all know what a loaded term that is when referencing someone of Mam's ethnicity. And regardless of who said it, whether it was Leniu or anyone else, there's no place for it in the game if it's true. What's made it worse in my books, boys, is the blasé post-match interview of Leniu, where he's
absolutely
essentially it's boys will be boys. It's all fun and games on the field, and then the triple down by Trent Robinson, who I feel was quite analogous to Steve Kerr from the NBA, the Golden State Warriors coach, where a lot of the times you'll see them at the forefront of social issues in the code and doing good things and praising what their club and their players do. But when the tide flips around and their players are involved in something bad, for instance, Draymond Green for the Warriors, and in this case, Spencer Leniu, they're very quickly to dismiss the issue from the other side. And I think Robinson said something to the effects of Mam might have heard it wrong or didn't get it right. And it's like, well, I get you got to defend your guy, but you could have been a little bit more diplomatic with that. I was a bit disappointed in Robinson's response there. So it's been referred directly to the judiciary, boys. We obviously have to wait and see, because the referee, was it Adams, Adam G, for this one?
Yes.
He specified that he didn't hear the slur, which is completely understandable. He's calling the game at a rapid pace. He put it on the report. There was no clear replay on the day with microphones capturing it, but the NRL has access to more audio with Fox Sports. But being referred directly to the judiciary would imply, like I said, there is at least some substantive evidence. If it's true, I personally am completely on board with Leniu being rubbed out for the season. Volandis has flagged that he wants to take this very seriously, which I respect. I do expect the suspension to be somewhere in the vein of 6 to 8 weeks, but if they want to make a statement, I'm completely on board with a season ban.
Yeah, look, the first thing I want to say is if this has happened as, and you indicated that there has to be something substantive there to reach the stage that it's at now, and also for the players to react as they did, especially Mam's teammates.
Yeah, I didn't mention, but Mam was apparently in tears after the game.
The altercation?
And then that led to Carrigan and Katoni Staggs confronting Leniu later that night. So this is serious. Like, this is not... usually when this happens on the field, and we've seen it in the past, I think Paul Gallen had an allegation against him, players don't like to put it on report. They will let it stay on the field. But this is obviously done with some spite. If it has happened, allegedly, Mam feels that this was done with a level of vindictiveness that transcends, as Leniu would say, fun and games on the field.
Yeah. So my first take, John, is you just go, why?
Yeah, I agree.
Why on earth would you do this? Because the game has such a strong stance against racism for a start. Then you've got, this is the biggest promotion in possibly the NRL's history. The player himself had been involved in going to Vegas in an earlier trip to do promotional work.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no confusion about the nature of the occasion and the importance of the occasion. So everything, it's like, man, you know what? If this is true, the person deeply require a lesson.
Yes, from a fundamental level, I agree.
Yeah, and so whilst I don't know about a full season, John, but also I'm not sure that 6 to 8 weeks is necessarily going to deliver a lesson. I think if you got half a season and a financial fine to go with it, I think you deliver a very clear message in that instance. And it's I have deep concerns about, I can almost feel the apologist media coverage at some point down the track where, someone's, you read about, he's a different person, or it's, things have been turned around and what have you. You just, I don't know, it just stinks. And I have to tell you, I saw one horrid instance of racism in a football crowd that turned my stomach. And until you actually hear, and I mean, we've all seen various instances, various levels of racism that people have to face out there. But I just want to share this one incident that happened at a game, and it was at Parramatta Stadium, and it went back to when there was the issue where Tamana Tahu took offence about Andrew John's comments in an Origin camp. So it was around that time, and there was a supporter in the crowd, and this was just before the first grade game was about to start, and I think they'd made the team announcements. And he just started coming out with all this. As I said, my stomach was turning. What he was saying about Tamana, but then he was making it a real attack on, like just a full-on racial attack, a general one. And people were like turning around and staring at him, and he wasn't backing down. He was just going for it. So this one bloke stood up and said, basically, to pull his head in and to stop it. And some people went running off to get security as well. But he was offering to build up this bloke who objected to him saying it. Like, not only was he a vile racist, but he was obviously had violent tendencies as well.
What a shock.
Fortunately, it wasn't long before security escorted him out of the ground. But when you hear, like, it just being yelled like that at a game, and you think there are people there who not only have these thoughts, which is one thing, but they want to own and broadcast their vile comments like a badge of honour. And if we have the NRL stage owned by, well, not owned by, but if people are still allowed to get away with it without significant consequence, then it will always exist in some level. And as I said, you have to think to yourself, why would someone do this still in our game? But I guess we're not out there on the field. We're not hearing everything that people say. But let's praise people who do stand up to it, like Ezra Mam did, and to call it out when it happens, because when it's called out like that, and provided there's a follow-through consequence, then you've got a chance of it coming to or getting close to coming to an end.
I think.
Beautifully said, mate. Beautifully said.
I think what really blows my mind, and on the backdrop of this is a podcast of three very white Australian guys here, so we come from a very different perspective, oftentimes on the wrong perspective when it comes to these when these allegations come out in the game. It was for me, it was such a shock that Spencer Leniu, someone that Samoan backdrop, I believe, Samoan international, and would level that sort of vilification at Ezra Mam. It's like, where does it come from? Clint, you played some pretty serious level of rugby league, and that firing up and trying to pester and annoy and verbally spar for your opponents happens, but there is so much territory to have a dig at someone, whether it's at their own game, whether it's at even as something as dark as going after family, right? And we know that can cause issue. You look at the Soccer World Cup with Zinedine Zidane, that can also cause people to snap. But this is just a bridge that you don't go down. I don't understand where Spencer Leniu, why he would even consider this in the first place. So I don't know.
It beggars belief, and there is no reason for it.
Yeah, it's a complete.
You can slice and dice it as much as you want. There is no reason for it. And as someone who's married to someone who isn't white, and comes from a South American cultural background, it's unfortunately something that is still present in society. I don't think it's necessarily a as widespread a problem as sometimes it is made out to be. But in the same breath, I also still think it's a problem.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's an intensified problem within the places where it is a problem. And we speak about Vegas being the showcase for rugby league, and then something like this happening over in the United States, where there is a very intense cultural war taking place at the moment.
Agreed.
Yeah. Like that's an even worse look for the product and the game. And you touched on before Sixties that he went over there to promote in the first instance. There's a lot of things adding up here where you just go, like, you're meant to be a spokesperson. You've brought the game into disrepute, allegedly. So, if he is found guilty, I'm actually with you, John. I think there should be a very intense ban. And, I think that is, you have to send a clear message soon as round 3, gentlemen, that we've got cultural rounds that we celebrate. So that's only a couple of weeks away, right? The NRL has made a lot of leaps and bounds in the inclusion space and in a celebratory way as well. I feel like with a lot of businesses out there and corporations, it's very tokenistic, but with rugby league and sport, it's very much a celebration of the cultures. Which is exactly the way that you want it to be. You want it to be authentic. And, you have incidents like this that just potentially, it leaves a sour taste in everyone's mouth. And, I hope that there is a resolution to this and it's all clarified. And if the alleged is found to have been guilty of their of such, that they are punished accordingly.
And we'll move on from this, boys, and I'll just sign off by saying that it's always easy to bring this sort of energy when it's an opposing player, someone from another club, and you can always just tee off on them and say what a dickhead they are and how disgusting it is that they're racist. I do like to think that had it been an eel, that we would maintain the same energy. And I think looking back on what happened,
without a doubt,
looking back on what happened with Dylan Brown last year, and I think our openness for him to accept whatever punishment the NRL leveled at him, whether it was a 7-week suspension like he got thereabouts or longer, like sexism or adjacent to that with what he did, sexual misconduct with Dylan, and racism here, Spencer Leniu. If it's an eel or not an eel, there is no place for this in the game. And regardless of who it is, the hammer needs to come down on him and to really stamp this stuff out. So we wait and see. This is also going to go to the judiciary this week. It's going to be a huge story for the NRL. They're going to be all over it, and we have to wait and see how it plays out. One last thing from America, boys, and this one's on a more positive note. We had a report that it's been billed as a 49ers boss, Al Guido, but he is the head of football operations, not the owner of the 49ers, Clint, who is the York family, who actually have pretty significant sporting investments across the globe. He seems to be intrigued by the proposition of purchasing an NRL club. Sydney Morning Herald has reported on it. He's sort of been, I suppose, equally moved by what he saw in Vegas and what has been done with the Wrexham Football Club experiment with Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney of Always Sunny fame. One of my favourite shows.
Absolutely. And, obviously not being the owner, but a part of working for the 49ers enterprises, who also have a controlling ownership in the Leeds United Football Club, happens to be the European football club that I support. They obviously seen something that they've liked in rugby league and across the Vegas round one games this weekend past. And, it's not uncommon for, whether it's owners or people in upper management in this case to throw some of these one-liners out there just to see and gauge what sentiment, how that sentiment, I should say, might be received. Rugby league's a little bit of a different beast because unlike European sporting franchises and American sporting franchises, they're not group owned or sole ownership or anything like that. In the most part, granted, there are some cases, some sprinkled cases of that in rugby league in terms of joint ownership, but for the most part, most clubs are member owned. And it would have to pass a member resolution in order for something like that to even get off the ground. So there'd have to be a lot of water to pass under the bridge before something like that was to even eventuate. But that being said, you got to dangle the carrot and get an understanding of what the appetite might be out there for it. And the 49ers Enterprises is a very successful business franchise.
They've been incredibly successful on the field. They've done everything but win a Super Bowl in the last sort of 5 to 6 years.
And you've got Leeds United, who are very, very well supported English football club, albeit they're not in the top tier at the moment, but they're absolutely well on the hunt for a return to that after being relegated season previous. And they're a one team down up there as well, very parochial crowd, very passionate Yorkshire crowd up there in the north of England. So given that's the profile of the clubs or the franchises that they work with. Likewise, you mentioned there very aptly there 49ers have done everything but win the Super Bowl in the better part of the last 20, 30 years or so. You combine those two elements, and it's almost as though the Eels kind of fit that profile. And I had a little bit of a chuckle to myself when I saw that this little throwaway line from the 49ers. President of football operates, something like that isn't necessarily going to eventuate anytime soon.
It could be a fun thing to watch in the next 2 to 4 years as we continue to try and grow the game in America. I don't expect anything of it to come initially, but I was saying to you, Clint, my concern would be if they take that Wrexham angle, and the Wrexham story is a really fun one. Like there's a whole documentary series about their rise through the lower grades in the below the EPL, and what the club has done to grow. It's not a quaint, rise through the relegations in the NRL. You're in the top league. No. You need to be competing from day one. But there are more privately owned clubs in the NRL than I thought. You obviously got the Broncos, the Storm, Manly, Rabbitohs. But on top of that, the Titans, who recently went through an ownership acquisition. But the Warriors, the Rabbitohs, the Dragons. So you got, I think it's 7 clubs. So
I didn't realise the Dragons were.
Yeah, 50% Win Corporation, 50% St. George Leagues Club, apparently.
Of course.
So
of course.
The controlling stake, I suppose, can be done privately there. There are avenues beyond membership there for interested American ownership consortiums or individuals to get their feet wet in the NRL, and it's definitely something to wait and see. But we move on to the last 2 pieces of news, and it's nothing major, boys. Apparently, the Dragons have got a little win on the board in convincing the NRL to reduce Luciano Leilua's suspension of 2 games to 1. Not a huge fan of that. Again, we talk about creating a culture of accountability, and we obviously referenced Spencer Leniu there if he is guilty. In the same case of Leilua, he hid his incident with the police from the NRL and the Cowboys, and I feel like reducing the suspension sends completely the opposite message from what you want. Any thoughts, or we move on to the last bit of news, boys? Because it's not really. Yeah, what do you say about that?
Look, we had a bit of a discussion about this last week, 40, and I'm not going to rehash whole ground there, but that's a bit disappointing in terms of sending a message in terms of social responsibility there, and personal accountability as well as you mentioned. Yeah, look, when someone doesn't share something, you have to suggest that they're purposely withholding
Yeah,
information.
exactly. And that's my big concern of all this. But whatever, the Dragons gain there maybe helps them fend off the Tigers at the bottom of the table. Last bit of news, and this one stunned me because it's not a utility player, but the Rabbitohs have released Daniel Salukafafita, who was being picked up by the Bulldogs while he's recovering from a serious injury, I believe. And I think the Dogs have actually extended him for 2 years. I'm just trying to find the report there. So
Right.
they beef up their forward pack, which is something of an area of need for them. They've been in the hunt for some middles. The former, Rooster turned Rabbitoh, now turned Bulldog, will eventually shore up their stocks in the middle, but he won't be available for a while as he recovers from injury. So, yeah, that's the only really signing news I've got here. And I think that just about brings an end to a mammoth podcast, boys. There was a lot to talk about this week. As we
what are we coming in at?
hour 40, so it's a big one. It's a big
Wow.
one.
Wow.
But that's the hype that the first Teamless Tuesday, the proper Teamless Tuesday of the season brings.
Wow. Okay.
All right, let's start wrapping up, boys. As always, thank you to the sponsors of the show. You know them, Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Irwin, and Parramatta. Thank you to Quint and Sixties for putting up with us, all of us meandering along. It was a good podcast in spite of all the content we had to get through, and it was some serious stuff there too. So thank you for dealing with the serious issues with the sort of respect it deserves. 60s, I'll let you sign off.
Well, mate, as I always say, go you mighty Eels.